one thing I wanted
Yep.
to address is sometimes people watch these classes and they're watching us sort of like quickly type people and throw things around, and that's part of the sort of typing process that we have. But if you're watching this and thinking that this is how you land on an accurate typing, you're likely to make a lot of mistakes. So there is a process of like, we've been doing this together for a long time, and we can quickly land on a typing, and like 80% of the time that typing is going to be right. But there's a process of, we get a typing, we riff on it together, and then we go away and individually look at it. And then if three separate people individually can look at something and then come back together and say, yeah, we're all seeing the same thing, then that increases the accuracy. But more often than not, someone's going to see something or bring up a question, and we're going to have to consider an alternative. And so it's not just people watching these classes shouldn't think that the way that we're doing it is going to consistently arrive at an accurate result. Like, we've
Sure.
developed a process, is what I'm trying to say, to catch mistakes. So what we want to talk about today is, some of the most common mistakes. And for those of you who are trying to get better at typing, what you can do to increase the rate that you get these right.
I think that, the thing I'd start with, I don't know if this is most common mistakes, but I think the thing I'd start with, like I'm watching, this will be released after, but our weekly typing guest was Matt LeBlanc this week, and I'm not going to, oh no, this will be released after, so I can talk about, right, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing some people,
Right.
so, he's 9-wing-8 DJ, and I'm seeing some people pull out some good things, but there are some people, like the thing that needs to be always emphasized with typing is that you have to get the center energy first. And that is actually something you can almost just like close your eyes in some way and like feel and like take it. Like, where is the center? If you can see DJ for Matt LeBlanc, that's smart. But when you watch Matt LeBlanc in an interview, like the first thing that should pop out is like, he's gutty. He's slow. He's solid. So it's like, it doesn't even matter what his trifix is. If you get that first, like, I think that's the most common big mistake that I see people make, is that like they're actually scrambling the centers, and that's like the first thing that you have to kind of feel out. And once you get that, because if you don't have the center, then you're like, oh, it could be this and that. There's so many options trying to fit pieces together. But if you're like, no, this is a gut type. This has to be a gut. Again, there are confusing examples like some of the twos that we saw this week. But if you can guess, like most aren't that confusing. You can get like, this is definitely gut type. This is definitely a head type. Then it's much easier to start there. It's like the difference between 5 and 7 is not as huge, or, for example. So that's to me the most common mistake, is I see people scrambling centers.
This is another spot for the whole overlaps thing too. I mean, I'm thinking of it in the context of, say, collages or whatever. But if someone's got a 5 fix or a 4 fix or both, like their collages or maybe even their video clip could look social blind, for example, because 4 and 5 overlap with the 2 social blind stackings, and et cetera, following through with that whole overlaps schema.
Yeah. So like, for example, when we do these sort of fast impressions, when we see somebody, when you like think, oh, this person might be a 3 or this person might be a 9, it's with the knowledge that what you're seeing could also be represented by a couple other types. And so, like, for example, if you're seeing that someone is pretty withdrawn, well, there's multiple different ways withdrawnness can show up. So what you have to learn how to do is take your first impression. That's valuable, because the way the type initially hits you is going to point to something, but don't completely trust that first impression is the whole story. So you have to check other possibilities. So if you think, well, this could be, this person is kind of emotionally removed or detached, well, that could be 9, it could be 5, it could be 3. And then you can, like, for example, if you can say that this person's DJ, then you can drill down and say, like, am I seeing head? And if you think it's 7, then you can go even further and say, well, let's actually workshop 7 and see if the rest of 7 fits. Am I seeing frustration? So part of what I'm trying to get across is that typing is work. Like, you have to double check and look at things from multiple angles. Like, it's easy to go with your first impression and be like, it's like gambling. I think this team is going to win, or I think this fighter is going to win. Like professional gamblers
Mhm.
actually do homework and look at multiple possibilities to come out with the most likely thing. But when you have a team of people who can give multiple perspectives, you quickly realize that your first impression is not always correct. And so why we're consistent is that we have a process that we have like a couple weeks that we're doing this each typing through, and we have
Mhm.
multiple people. So we end up catching 99% of the time our mistakes because we have a process built in to get multiple perspectives and multiple angles on things.
Yeah, we don't also, I mean, maybe we said it before and maybe it's obvious, but we don't, um, nobody of the three of us takes the lead really, and or defers, and we disagree
Right.
often and plenty of times, right? I mean, usually,
Right.
in some small way, this way or that, and yeah, so it kind of comes together over time.
Yeah, there's this whole thing about first impressions because some people will be like, "Oh, my first impression was this. I need to trust that." But then there'll be like 50% of the time your first impression is just wrong. So there's
Right.
really so it's important to listen to your first impression because it's as important as the other impressions, right? Like if you get
Hmm.
a first impression, like you said, and your first impression is, wow, this person feels really withdrawn or really hidden or whatever, or you're like, wow, this person's loud. So it's like, okay, write down, okay, who are the like what are if the my first impression is, whoa, what are the types that could be? Let's start writing them
Right.
down. Then you're
Right.
like, okay, I've written down 7, 3, 8, or 6. Like maybe those are
Mhm.
the 4 types I would write down for like possible loud type of people. And then you're like, okay,
Mhm.
so I got 2 head types, one gut, one head. Sorry, 2
Hmm.
head type, whatever. Now
One
let
heart,
me
yeah.
look at this. Forget about that. I got that impression. That's great. What center are they in? And if you can narrow
Hmm.
down the center, you've probably narrowed down the type at this point. You're like, okay, this is a loud type in the heart center. It's probably a 3. Or this is, I mean, I don't even think 3s are that loud, but whatever. I'm just saying, like, whatever the situation is, if you take your first impression, lay it out, and then start chiseling down at like, okay, first things first, center, and
Hmm.
then go from there.
Or the object relational affect. I mean, that's a huge powerful. If you could, because you're not going to be able to have like a
True.
checklist of I'm going to go step by step. Certain things, depending on the person, are going to hit you first. Like you might see the center first. You might feel
Yeah,
the
exactly.
trifix first, or you might see the object relational affect. Take whatever you feel comfortable with and go from there, and go to the next one that you feel like. Maybe you feel really good with the centers. Pick the triads that you're most comfortable with and start working down. The other thing I want to say is that I think people have said something about watching these DAA classes and watching us like get impressions from images that we're typing people visually. What we're doing when we're looking at images is that if you get enough experience, there are anecdotal impressions that you've downloaded that can be shortcuts, but we are not basing typings based on our visual impressions.
No,
I
you
mean, you
can't do
should
that.
use your impressions
It's
however you
part of
get
it.
them,
Yeah.
but the point of typing is that you're sort of three-dimensionally building a type structure based on what you're seeing, and you have to look at so many things to make sure that you're not just pulling bullshit out of your ass. So to convey that it's a process, regardless of how you do it, to make sure that you're not making mistakes left and right. That's the only way that you can consistently get this correct, is if you have a way to catch, how am I making sure that this is not um, some other type.
I think one thing we landed on at some point, I don't know if it was the pod or here, but like if you had to pick two of the triads that would be the most important, it would be the centers combined with the object relations.
Yes.
If
Yes.
you put those two together, if you recognize somebody's a gut type, are they doing frustration or rejection or attachment? But ideally, too, though, it's sort of this three-dimensional model or whatever, where you've got those other triads as well, the Hornavian groups
Yeah.
and the harmonic groups. If you put all those together, those four uh, triads, and can see that somebody's doing, you know, everything that a 7 does, right? All four
Right.
of those, then boom, you're really zeroing in on something.
And to that point, that it's not done until you can go down the line and see the rest of it. Like if you think somebody might be a 7,
Yes,
if you don't see
there you go.
head type frustration, and then the rest of the positive outlook, the assertiveness, like you have to go down the line. That's why typings work. Like you actually have to go through and verify that the type fits the rest of the type structure. You can't just go based on one triad and be like, yeah, I think this person's a 7. Do the homework and see if the rest of it fits. So when we finalize a typing, it's because we're seeing not just oh, they're in the heart center and their attachment, but they're also assertive, and you go down the list of the rest of it
Hmm.
fits, like, so you know that you have a typing that's a type structure. It's not
Yep.
just based on, oh, a description, or, oh, I think this person's a 3 because they're self-promotional. It's like we're looking at structure, and that's why we can be consistent. We could look into what are some of the most common typing mistake people make. I mean, one of them is just the centers, but
Yeah.
6-wing 7 versus 7-wing 6 is one that happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We've covered social self-pres versus self-pres social. That's a very common mistake that people constantly make, and we still have to double check on all the time.
Hmm.
Mistaking a 6 for an 8 is another typing mistake that still happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Mistaking 9 for everything else in the Enneagram, it will
Yeah,
never end.
I think that's one of the
Well,
hardest things. I think like realizing how many different types of people end up being 9s is just like mind blowing, because
Right,
you're like, that can't, it just can't be, it can't be, and then you're just like, oh no, it's 9.
right.
Like it's just 9s really, they're so adaptable that they can look at so many different ways. It's not, and again, it's I should also address, it's not this thing that's like anything's 9, if we don't know what it is, it's 9. Like, no, 9 is a very
no,
specific type
no.
structure, but I'm just saying, as a first impression, a lot of 7-wing 6s say have this really kind of obvious energy that you're just kind of like, you kind of spot them, but it's like, you're not really, that's not really how 9 works. 9, you can still go down the line and find it, find attachment, find withdrawn, find all of that stuff, but as a first impression, 9s are hard.
Hmm.
So I think that's a common mistake, just missing 9s.
One thing for me when typing David Bowie, I mean, I've been into
Yeah.
David Bowie for whatever 40 years, and I've been to the Enneagram for 30, and I never even would have considered 9
Yeah,
actually. And then I started to look at videos,
it was
just
hard.
just allowing allowing myself to consider 9, and I was like, oh, what the hell?
Right.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the last numbers I ever would have expected
It's
from him.
almost like you always have to because it is just so common,
Right.
and it's most common, and
Yeah.
it's the hardest to type by far. So it's almost like you just want to just start and be like, okay, is this person a 9 or not? Let's just start there.
Well,
If you can get
let's
that out of
start
the
there. Yeah.
way, then you can kind of be like, okay, well, what are we seeing then? Because
Part of it,
Yeah.
6-wing 7, 7-wing 6, that's a whole thing that, like,
Sure.
sometimes there are some really shy 6-wing 7s, but for the most part, it's like you're not gonna.
part of the thing with
Yeah.
9 is like that type structure is meant to just sort of be invisible and fall into the background. So like you end up seeing everything but the core
Well,
9, because everything, it's sort of like it's bringing everything else to the forefront. So um,
it,
mistaking 9s for everything else is the most common typing
Yeah,
mistake,
I
because
think
that's
that is the
literally
most
what
common. Yeah.
it,
that's literally
it
what the type
really
9
is.
structure.
Yeah, that's the structure of 9 is its invisibility. So you're going to
Right,
see the fixes, and you're going to see the stacking, and the stacking could look like a certain type that's not
right.
9, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the hardest thing for me when I was learning how to type, where every time I just be like, oh my god, it's not, like, I think of things like, I don't know, like Drew Barrymore. It's like,
Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
you got social, sexual, triple positive, and so this is a just uh, whatever, really bubbly, sweet person in the limelight or whatever. But like, yeah, she's a 9. It's whereas, and then you can compare her to, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to find super introverted celebrities, but there are these super like non-talking mute 9s. They don't. These two, you would not think these two people have the same core type, but they do.
right.
Yep.
And the other one is just, I mean, it's always going to happen till to the end of time, but just over typing 4s and 5s. I think people myself included, when you're new to the Enneagram, that you would like to
Yep.
imagine that there are more 4s and 5s out there. It's hard to believe that when you actually do the work of typing people, that there's not very many of them. So there can be a tendency of wanting it to be more than it
Hmm.
actually is. And
Hmm.
so the tendency to overtype 4s and 5s will always be a thing. But generally, that's what it is. I mean, 4, 5, and 8 are the ones people overtype for the most part, and people just overlook 6s and 9s, particularly 9s. But if people can get into the ballpark of like, oh, I think this person's 7 week 6 and they're actually 6 week 7, you're close.
Hmm.
I feel like you almost got it. That's close enough. That's not a bad mistake.